Welcome in the Fade. It's been a while, I guess a little bit over a month. We are doing an NCAA Tournament special edition. Me, Kelly Stewart, a.k.a. Kelly in Vegas, with a nice tan. Is that a real tan?
It is a real tan. I went to Mexico 2 weeks ago and just got off a cruise this morning.
So you were on a cruise ship. How would you describe the cruise that you were on? Like, I saw you and Ariel Epstein were sending me some videos and things like that. How big was the cruise ship? What was the overall clientele? How would you analyze the cruise experience? Before you do that, I haven't been on a cruise. We took the kids on a Disney cruise, and we were all five in the same room. Like, it slept five, bunk beds. Kids loved it. I was like, oh, my God, this is a lot. The kids wouldn't go to the kids' camp. They wanted to be with us all the time, kids' club, whatever it's called. We also weren't able to dock in Jamaica because the seas were too rough. I don't do well on boats. And I don't do well on boats, Kelly, because I don't like being anywhere that I can't leave. It's not that I travel all the time or anything else, but I'm a little bit claustrophobic. When I don't mind being on like an island, but I don't like being on a boat and not being able to leave the boat. It kind of gets to me. Like, if I had been on this, I could never be an astronaut. I couldn't go to space. If you told me I'm going to be there 8 days and I ended up being there 8 months, I would lose my mind. If you told me, hey, Clay, your new job is you have to be on a nuclear submarine under the water, I would also lose my mind. So I am curious how you found this cruise to be.
So I am not claustrophobic. I have great sea legs, but I do feel like right now I'm kind of swaying back and forth on camera, except I don't think I actually am. It's a very weird feeling. Look, this cruise was great. I went on one in college and I said never again. I changed my mind. This one was adults only, Virgin Voyages. We got a special invite from a good friend of mine that works for them, said, Kelly, you got to trust me. And he was right. This was a much different experience. We got off in the Dominican Republic, which was really nice because I haven't been back there since 2012. Hung out there for the day, went to Bimini for a day. That's where I got this lovely sunburn yesterday, and it was absolutely wonderful. Great service. And I was kind of shocked because usually that's where my issues coming from Vegas is that no one's ever going to have as good a service as Vegas. But it was really fun. Had a nice run in the casino last night. Little smash and grab before I got out. They had the NCAA games on the big screen, which was really nice. But overall, I would say I was pleasantly surprised. I still don't know if I'm a cruise person, Clay. Like, I might take like another family member. The room was great. We had a balcony. We had a balcony compared to where I stayed when I was in college, which basically would have been the equivalent of like a bathroom. Like, me and my girlfriend had no windows, nothing. We had an entire balcony. We had 5 rooms that were all conjoined. So we opened up the whole balcony, and every single night after the bars closed, we had our own balcony party, which may be what video and picture Ariel sent you of us screaming Morgan Wallen at 4:00 in the morning, disrupting our neighbors.
That actually sounds really fun. I went with Laura when we were dating in law school, and we stayed in like the Titanic steerage portion of the cruise ship, where like you are like way underground. Now, it only cost like $400 or something. It was after 9/11. Nobody would get on a cruise ship, for anybody out there who remembers that era. We went on a cruise in like March of 2002, if I remember correctly, or maybe it was March of 2003. Anyway, it didn't cost anything, and we were like way down. We did have a balcony with the kids, but the kids were so young, we were a little bit nervous that they would like fall off the balcony, which is its own danger. So anyway, I haven't been on a cruise in a while. I wouldn't mind doing, I think, a cruise in like Europe, where you're on a river and you get to go from one place to another. I've never gotten to do that. I wouldn't mind doing an Alaska cruise, but I don't know that I'll do another Caribbean cruise. All right, that's breaking down the cruise world with Clay and Kelly. Let's dive into the NCAA tournament world. Let's start with this for you. Do you buy futures at all? Do you buy national title tickets? Do you have anything in advance of the tournament? Is there any value you see in doing that before the big games really get underway in earnest tomorrow?
So, Clay, I have 3 futures tickets that I bet. I bet Florida at 40-1 back in December. I bet Texas Tech at 30-1.
That's a great number.
Yeah, listen, I feel way too good about the Florida Gators getting that 1 seed. I was watching the game on my phone. This is the best part about the cruise, I should say. I was in the high limit room. They let you do whatever you want. Like I was sitting there watching with the Tennessee fan named Harry, knowing I needed Florida to win the SEC championship, and we've got it propped up against the
Did you see me courtside? I should have texted you. You could have seen me courtside with my 10-year-old.
I missed it.
But this is actually true. I think ESPN, they came over to my 10-year-old, the camera guy did, and he was like, I'm going to put you on. They started to run the thing, and then he like leaned over and listened to his earpiece, and he was like, sorry, and he just walked away. I think an ESPN producer said, we can't put Clay Travis and his son on ESPN Air. I really think that's what happened, because we were sitting courtside. I mean, like, it's hard to miss us, and you could see from behind. You could see us the whole time. But yeah, they wouldn't. They wouldn't let my 10-year-old on, and they literally walked over. They were like, "Hey, I want you to cheer. We're going to get you coming out of the commercial break. We'll be sure that we did it." I saw him talk in his ear, and then he went away, and they never came back.
Well, that's unfortunate, but we know how they operate over there.
Yeah,
so it
conspiracy
is what it
theories.
Is. Yes.
Okay,
but
so
anyway,
you got Florida 40-1. From December. By the way, Gators right now around 3.5 or 4-1, depending on where you're looking. Second biggest favorite after Duke. So do you still think there's any value or not in any of the futures?
So no, right now, here's what you want to do. You want to take your money. Let's call it. Let's say you want to bet $100 just for basic math on the Florida Gators, and you're like you said, you're going to get maybe 4-1 at best, depending on where you like to shop.
Yeah.
But the idea is just bet them on the money line and roll it over. At this point, I cannot say. Now, it did not work out well last year for my UConn future doing that, right? My buddy John and I did a little experiment, and he said, okay, we've got UConn at plus 750, but we're just going to roll it over on the money line in the tournament. And guess what? UConn was so dominant. Dan Hurley covered every single game that there was zero value in the money line. It actually ended up costing us money. I do think that there are some teams that hold some value, but the problem is playing value teams usually don't equate to wins. So if you're looking to bet a future now, I'd say you got to have a team that's going to at least to the Elite Eight that you want to bet on, and then you will be able to hedge going forward. Unfortunately, I don't have any of those teams. Unfortunately for me also, my next bet that I had made at the end of January was Texas Tech 30-1. And they're the 3 seed in the same bracket as Florida. So that one's a little painful. I kind of joked with my buddies. I was like, it's kind of like a hedge, right? Say they play each other, then we'll just see how it goes from there. I do think Florida's going to have a nice run. I obviously love the underdogs, Clay, but there is not one underdog that stands out to me like an NC State from last year. We know there's going to be one. There just isn't one that I'm like definitively sold. I've heard a lot of guys say Clemson holds a lot of value. My problem is I don't think Clemson can win the whole thing.
All right, let's dive into the games themselves. So, I've got a chalk bracket. Here is my bracket that I am attempting to hold up for the camera. I have no idea if any of that is picked up. Here's my Final Four, Kelly. Auburn against Florida, Duke against Tennessee. So I legitimately have picked every 1 seed except my beloved Volunteers as the 2 seed. I have them in the Final Four. I have Florida rematch against Tennessee in the what would be basically a rematch of the SEC tourney. I've got Florida winning 82-76 in the championship game. So I've got the Gators. You will make a lot of money if I am right about the Gators winning. Do you love any of the first-round matchups that are out there, beginning with the Thursday games, which I believe, let me see which one tips off first. The very first, tell me if I'm wrong on this. I think we've got Creighton-Louisville as the 12:15 Eastern first tip game, which is actually a great game. What do you like in Thursday or Friday action?
So, Clay, full disclosure, I've only bet 5 games so far in the tournament because I'm looking for holes in a matchup. I'm looking to bet against certain coaches, and we'll just gonna rip the Band-Aid off now. I like Wofford plus 18.5. Here's the reality: your beloved Vols are probably not going to lose this game as a double-digit favorite, right? We know they like to play slow. We know they have a great methodical defense. There comes some questions though here against the Terriers, and this team went in and won the Southern Conference Congratulations to them. They do have some holes on defense. But my whole issue in regards to Tennessee has always been Rick Barnes. I understand he's got some really good things going for him, but come NCAA tournament time, what happens? 11-23 against the spread. I mean, that is like the worst of the worst. I mean, the next guy that's bad is Mark Few at 22-31. Randy Bennett at 6-9. Rick Barnes is by far the worst coach in March, and that is why I'm looking at taking the 18.5 with the Wofford Terriers.
Let me ask you this. This is my theory on why that is. I think that Rick Barnes gets the absolute most out of his team in the regular season. And a lot of times in the regular season on a Tuesday or a Wednesday or a random Saturday, it's hard to get guys motivated. Nobody tiptoes into the NCAA tournament. You get everybody's attention. You get everybody's maximum effort because the games are so large. I don't think it's that Rick Barnes is a bad March Madness coach. I think it's actually that he's a really good regular season coach, and he's squeezing every ounce of his team's ability in the regular season. And then when the postseason comes, everybody is able to compete at a higher level. And I'll also point this out. The last 2 years, Rick Barnes, Sweet 16, I think he overachieved, even though we watched that game and they eventually lost to FAU, and that was brutal. But he beat a Duke team that he wasn't supposed to beat to get to the Sweet 16 that year after he had his point guard, Zakai Ziegler, tear his ACL, and there was no point. Last year, went to the Elite Eight and played against Purdue. I think if Tennessee had drawn anybody but Purdue or UConn, I think they would have been in the Final Four last year. I think Purdue was just a better team. They didn't have anybody big to match up with Zach Edey. That was a tough situation to go against that team. So my point is the last 2 years, Rick Barnes has actually done pretty well. But I do understand the reticence based on the past history. That would be the way I analyze it. Do you buy that at all? Because otherwise he's not a bad coach. It doesn't make sense to me that suddenly he's not prepping his teams or they get too tight because in top 10 matchups or top 25 matchups regular season, they're off the charts good.
Well, how about this? Maybe making the SEC tournament championship was a good thing for them. They didn't have that much of a layoff, right? When we saw them at Madison Square Garden a couple of years ago, what happened? Well, when you have that lull, maybe you're right. Maybe he needs to keep his foot on the gas with his teams. And that break for some of them with an early exit in their conference tournament is actually a detriment to this team because the Vols have all the athleticism in the world. They're not the biggest team. I think this matchup is a little bit tighter than what it should be. 18.5 seemed like a ton of value. Again, I didn't think you guys would lose. We know you guys have a solid 3-point defense, but that is what Wofford can do. They can bang down the threes. And if they can get rebounds off the glass, it could be one of those just really dicey games up until late where, the cover ends up coming into play in the last few minutes with free throws or what have you. Again, I'm not saying you guys are going to lose, but I thought 18.5, especially after losing to Florida in that fashion, just seemed somewhat defeating.
All right, let's go into the first game, Creighton-Louisville. I think it's an amazing game. And by the way, I don't think it's an easy draw for Auburn to be the overall number one team. Creighton very well coached. Louisville in Lexington. And again, I know Kentucky people hate Louisville, but that's an easy trip. If Louisville covers and they're in a 2.5-point line here, I think they will. Auburn might well have a disadvantage in terms of there being a very much pro-Louisville crowd in that matchup against Auburn. So let's look at that top part of the bracket there. Then you also have Michigan going up against UC San Diego, A&M going up against Yale. We know that Yale pulled off the upset last year over Auburn. Breaking all of this down, I think a lot of chalk holds, but a lot of people are on UC San Diego. A lot of people out there saying, okay, do you buy A&M or not? They definitely stumbled late in the season. What do you see in that kind of opening quad?
That's interesting, Clay, because we just mentioned, teams and how they end up doing. Do they finish strong? Do they not? Michigan was one of those teams that made me want to rip my hair out on multiple times. Dusty May's squad was a great second half team, but it was almost like they just kind of sandbagged it for the first half of some of these games, especially against their in-state rival, Michigan State. I mean, Michigan State was up huge in that final regular season game. And then they went on a nice little run in the Big Ten tournament. And I cannot quite figure them out. I'll say this about Michigan. I know nothing about UC San Diego. That's the best part, I think, about March Madness is you get all these teams that are so small and under the radar. You have to like start to dig deep. But I will say one of my buddies thought they could be the Cinderella team this year. And I thought, I can't wait to bet against Michigan, a team that doesn't hit three-point shots, turns the ball over, and is incredibly frustrating, commits a ton of fouls. Here's the real issue. I don't know enough about the team from San Diego, other than they have the nation's longest active win streak, and they went 25-7 against the spread this year. Like, that's just nuts. Everybody's going to want to bet on them. I understand that Michigan by far is the more talented team here, but UC San Diego, I'll say this, I'm going to put a little asterisk next to them. I think this is a coin flip type game. I'm not going to be getting involved, but none of us would be shocked to see Michigan lay an egg, especially coming out of that, Big Ten tournament play. I just don't trust them here. And this is where March Madness gets to be so exciting, Clay. You get these smaller schools that are absolutely hungry, and you consistently get big name programs that overlook them.
When you look at the big favorites here, speaking of that, you got Auburn, 31.5-point favorite, Houston, 28.5-point favorite. Bama, I think, is like a 28.5-point favorite. These 1 and 2 matchups. Sorry, Bama's a 22.5-point favorite. You got Florida, I think, that's a 28.5-point favorite over Norfolk State. Do you like taking these massive underdogs, or do you like playing the favorites? How do you handle the 1s and 2s in what is, in theory, a huge matchup difference? And to be fair, forever we heard, oh, nobody ever loses as the 1 seed, and then we saw UVA get taken down, and then we saw Purdue get taken down, and both of those schools bounced back the next year and had an incredible run, kind of showing you a little bit how arbitrary the tournament can be. Purdue to the final, UVA after they lost going all the way and winning the title. Talk about a bounce-back performance. It certainly suggests that a lot of this is very arbitrary.
I would have to agree with you, Clay. And listen, I'm not in the business of laying giant points ever, right? I don't do it in the NFL, I don't do it in college football, and I don't do it in college basketball. Here's the reality. The teams that you're naming that are massive double-digit favorites, 25 points or more, are for a reason. They're bigger, faster, stronger, but you're absolutely correct. Whether it's NIL, whether it's some of these smaller up-and-coming coaches getting their first head coaching job, or maybe it's some of these big-name schools overlooking some of these smaller programs. That is a lot of chalk to be laying against some very hungry teams. I'll say this much. I don't want to get involved with like a team named Alabama State coming off a play-in game, hard fought, right? Watched it the other night. Sitting there in the sportsbook against St. Francis. I had St. Francis plus 4.5 and thought, I can't believe I'm going to lose this game. It didn't end up coming out that way. But the reality is someone from the Southwestern Athletic Conference to beat someone from the Southeastern Conference is just not going to probably happen. But now we're getting into is there any value here, right? If you go on Ken Palm, you go on Bartovic, they all give an assessed value. Ken Palm says Auburn wins by 30. Does that mean that 28.5 is a gift? Means Auburn should be able to blow them out of the gym. Does it mean they will, or will they already be looking ahead, as you mentioned, to that Creighton-Louisville game?
No, I mean, it's a fascinating question. What else do you like? You said you liked 5 of them. You gave us the game Tennessee going up against Wofford. Who else do you like in round 1?
I know a lot of people are going to be surprised by this, but I laid 4.5 with the Kansas Jayhawks. Early exit there against Arizona in the Big 12 tournament. It seems like everybody's kind of written them off, right? This is one of Bill Self's worst years, 21-12. Pretty hard to imagine that is awful, but it's true. And that's because this team didn't make their free throws. They turned the ball over too much. And their offense just could not get going. There's some theories behind it, whether it was KJ Adams to blame, Hunter Dickinson. I'll leave it at that. This is the most experienced team in college basketball. I think that they are going to give this Arkansas team a run for their money. I'll tell you this much. Coach Cal, though, 32, 25, and 3 in March. So he has a little bit of an edge here, but I do think that the Jayhawks can get on the glass, get those offensive rebounds, and we all know Arkansas cannot hit a 3 to save their lives. So if Kansas can reduce their points in the paint, I also kind of like the under here. I think both defenses are really, really underrated. Obviously, they're both rated in the top 25, but I think they need a little bit more credit. So I did lay 4.5 with Kansas. I also took 6 this morning with Georgia, and I think this one's headed, I don't have my odds screen open right now, but I think this one's headed to 5.5, even 5. Georgia is a really frustrating team, Clay, and wanting to back them here is, well, not my brightest moment, but I'm actually looking at them to make a nice run. They had an early exit, rested after losing to Oklahoma. Now they play the Zags. Here's a Zags team that I think has had just a really off year. They can't hit a 3-point shot. They don't make their free throws. They have a lot of serious issues on fouling their opponents. Here's a real interesting thing. Mark Few has been awful during the NCAA tournament as well. So I did take the number while it was still rogue here in Florida. Speaking of Oklahoma, I took the couple points with them as well. Oklahoma is, man, they all year long, I kept saying, I don't understand this team. I don't understand this team. They end up beating Georgia in the SEC tournament and then losing to Kentucky by a point. But that kind of gives them a little bit of time to get healthy here. Very experienced team. They do make their free throws when they're not spending time turning the ball over. I think this is a really good matchup for them against Connecticut and what did I say? I took 2. That's not correct. That's a short line there. I took 4.5, 5. UConn, Dan Hurley, best coach, Clay, in the NCAA tournament over the past few years. Obviously, that's why they won back-to-back championships, but they've showed some issues. This year, they lost both games at St. John's, and if you remember, that's because St. John's had a really solid defense. I'm looking for the Sooners defense to be able to stifle UConn and kind of what I think is more of a down year. I thought this line was a little too high. I think Oklahoma wins this game outright. I know Connecticut wants to play slow and low, but I'm not buying it. In the last game that I bet, I laid 14.5 here with Arizona. Arizona, as I mentioned, off that nice win over Kansas and Texas Tech. Then they lost to Houston there in the last couple rounds of the Big 12 tournament. What we're looking for, Clay, when we want to back certain teams is their offense and defensive ratings. Everybody has been talking about it all year long now. Teams that are in the top 25 in both. And the Wildcats are sitting just on the outside defensively. And that's because they play really fast. They don't make their 3-point shots, but they can get points in the paint. And I think that's where they're going to be able to take an advantage of this Akron team. I mentioned active win streaks. Akron is on the 10th longest active win streak in the country. Everybody wants to back them. I think they're a square dog here. I think Arizona runs away with it.
How efficient do you think the market is when it comes to lines in the NCAA tournament compared to, let's say, the NFL, where lines barely move in the NFL, right? They basically land, they stick. A half point or a point is substantial. College football, they tend to move way more, and honestly, the less big the game is, the more they can move. Is there an efficient marketplace in your mind on the NCAA tournament because of the number of people watching, or is it still somewhat of an inefficient marketplace because a lot of these teams, frankly, are not big names? A lot of people don't know the players on a lot of these teams because I would venture to say probably 90% of college basketball viewing is probably SEC, Big 10, Big 12. I would bet ACC, certainly if you add that, that's 90% of everything. A lot of these smaller conference teams, people don't know. Value or no?
So I think it's really interesting when we talk about markets, right? You mentioned the NFL. We know the NFL is the most efficient market. Whether the public comes into play or not, doesn't really matter. But we do know the Super Bowl, the public's cleaned up lately, and that is because there is a market flood of money that is recreational, similar to bowl games, right? College football, we have tons of guys that are getting the best of the information. As you mentioned, some of those smaller bowl games where they get injury news before Vegas does, and then the market just swings wildly in the other direction. It's similar in March to that compared to the NFL, but because you have so many people now with legalized betting, putting money into every single one of these. I mean, I know people are like, Kelly, how'd you only bet 5 games? And I'm like, how many games did you bet? 12? That's ridiculous. You can't find value on 12 games, but that's not how the general public operates. They want action. They want to be sitting in their chair with their 4 or 5 TVs and head on a swivel. They're action junkies, and that's okay. I'm not saying anything bad, but that's where the market tends to sway. I do think that the bookmakers are baiting people on a couple of these lines. I think a couple of them are really trappy looking. We mentioned UC San Diego. I think the UConn-Oklahoma game is another one. And, Yale, you mentioned Yale, what they were able to do last year. I know a lot of people wanting to back Yale plus a 7.5. As far as efficiency goes, yeah, I do think that the bookmakers have done a really good job. They look at the Bartovics, the Ken Palms of the world. They sit around in the back room and they decide collectively, all right, here's the number we're going to throw out. And they let the market move itself. Now, again, it's going to be different with the wise guy money, if you want to call it that, the sharp money versus the public. They will let enough recreational bettors move the line. And I think that's why we've seen some of these start to come down or move up in the opposite direction.
What about the play-in games? We've got one tonight, obviously, between Texas and Xavier. But UNC won. They blew out opposition. You've seen a lot of times that 11 seed that wins the play-in game goes on a little bit of a run. Sweet 16, Elite 8, even Final Four we've seen happen. Do you buy that there's an advantage associated with backing a team that won the play-in game? Is there value there? I saw, for instance, UNC now favored over Ole Miss in that 6-11 matchup. We know North Carolina is very talented. One thing that has me nervous if I'm a 1 seed, look, you mentioned UConn in that game going up against Oklahoma. If they win, they're not going to be overly impressed or intimidated by playing against Florida 2 days later because they've had such tremendous success. You mentioned Gonzaga, Georgia. If Gonzaga wins and plays against Houston, that would not be a crazy upset kind of scenario to see. Baylor's won a national championship recently under Scott Drew. They could win that 8-9 matchup, play against Duke. In other words, how much do you think having had success, coaches, players, factors into how you should analyze the NCAA tournament? Because there's definitely a lot of these 11 seeds that win one game and then it feels like they kind of get their rhythm going.
I would agree with you, Clay. It is almost as if it's a rhythm, right? Like they didn't get taken out or they snuck into the tournament. You catch fire. We saw it with my Kansas State Wildcats a few years ago where maybe they were just supposed to kind of hang around and then you get hot. You play a team, you figure out your strategy, and you have a good coaching staff that's able to do that. North Carolina was interesting because I did not want to get involved in that game last night. And I was sitting there watching and going, it went out of nowhere. I mean, it was a tie game early on, and then all of a sudden, North Carolina was up double digits. I mentioned Square Dog. That was, one of the Square Dogs last night. And I think that's where we see the wise guys really start to take advantage. I did like San Diego State on paper by all intents and purposes, but the Mountain West has been by far the worst conference in March for about, let's call it the last 15 years. Since you and I did a show there at the Westgate Superbook, I've been taking the unders.
It's been a long time ago, 11 years ago, by the way, I think, basically.
Yeah. And before then, when I was writing for the Las Vegas Review Journal in 2013, I gave out Mountain West under as my best bet, under 6.5 wins. And I think they won 3 games. There is going to be where the rubber meets the road. And of course, with money, with coaching, with all these things, these other conferences, the ACC is going to be superior. There may be 1 or 2 teams, but I think we've just seen consistently that teams like the Mountain West have not been great. Now, I will say the line move with North Carolina, I think, is a tad bit of an overreaction. And that is because of how dominant they just were over San Diego State. I like Chris Beard. I like this Ole Miss team. I'm not going to have a bet on it, but I would not be shocked to see the Rebels be able to put their foot on the gas and handle this North Carolina team, because we've seen North Carolina for better parts of the season just kind of fall flat. Yeah, they got to play Duke. They went 0-3 against Duke this year. Clemson, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of guys I know like Clemson. I'm not that high on that loss. On the road to Clemson was rather interesting. They just haven't shown me that they're the North Carolina of the past. They have some really weird, wonky losses, and that is because they turn the ball over so much. You end up beating yourself. You're going to end up getting beat by, 20, 30 points here, like we've seen them do on the road. I'm not going to be on the game, as I mentioned, but I do like Chris Beard here. I do like what I've seen from his team. They don't turn the ball over. They play fundamentally sound basketball. If they could get hot from three-point land, it could be a long day for the Tar Heels.
I've got Ole Miss going to the Sweet 16, building on that. Some upsets. Mizzou Sweet 16, BYU Sweet 16. Not much of an upset, but I've got Clemson in the Sweet 16 as well. And then, like I said, I've got a lot of chalk. Anything else, Kelly, you think anybody should know as they get ready for the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, you mentioned Mizzou. I was very happy to see Florida handle them for all intents and purposes. And I've been very tough on Dennis Gates, but I do love how his offense operates. And I think a lot of people are expecting this Drake team, who's won 7 straight with Ben McCollum, to somehow be able to beat up on Mizzou. They can't do it. They play too slow. They hold the ball too long. They don't make their free throws. I think this line's a little short and has me just on the edge. I might lay the 6.5 with Missouri. I'll let you guys know on X if I do. But look, it's week. It's, the first week. There's 4 straight days of college basketball. No need to go absolutely crazy. Look for some underdogs. Do you think he can win outright? Take him plus the points. Don't forget to sprinkle in the money line. I'm going to see if I can't spend a little bit more time trying to find 3 that I think can win outright, but I definitely think Georgia is going to be on my list for that one, and maybe find a couple other short ones. But there's going to be a double-digit dog that wins outright. Just make sure you have a little bit on that money line.
One bit of advice as we finish up here today, if you're just picking brackets and you are not out there just trying to pick, if you get benefits from a underdog winning, right now Colorado State as the 12 seed is favored over Memphis as the 5 seed. That's partly based on the health for Memphis. But if you get points for picking an underdog, the best possible situation is to have the underdog actually favored in the game. That can be a value proposition play just for people who don't even necessarily pick or just look at seeds. But if you get underdog bonus points, that's one where the seeding is out of whack relative to the line.
Very good point. Bets over brackets, but Clay is correct. Look for some of those quote-unquote upsets.
Just trying to help out everybody. All right. Love all of you. The next time you see me, hopefully I will be having returned from flying on Air Force One, which I cannot wait to do. I will be at the NCAA Wrestling Championships on Saturday with President Trump. Gonna be fun. Kelly, good luck with the bets. Maybe we'll try to do this next week for the Sweet 16 as well. But in the meantime, let's win some money.